At hour zero, Margaret Hale signed every evacuation order she was legally allowed to sign. That part would be omitted from the Concordat's first report. She emptied the coastal hospitals. She moved the children out of the flood schools. She ordered the harbor gates opened, the inland rail lines commandeered, the prison buses rerouted, the emergency kitchens unlocked. She called 3 governors, 2 admirals, and 1 mayor, who had once called her heartless on television, and told each of them exactly how many minutes they had left to move the people they could move. Then, when all the ordinary human work had begun, the Concordat offered her a miracle with a signature line beneath it. They could turn the stone, they could save the city. They could do it in 6 minutes. The price was not money, it was not land, it was not surrender in the military sense, it was a form called appropriate response. 1 paragraph, 1 seal. 1 agreement that the dead of the Pacific record would be transferred into Concordat civic health custody, digitized, optimized, and released from active human reference after 3 generations. The stone rooms would remain as heritage objects. The names would remain in archive. The hand would no longer be required. To the Concordat, this was mercy. To Margaret Hale, it was the second impact. Margaret Hale slid the brass key across the table at hour 31. The auditor did not touch it. The auditor did not yet understand that she had just been handed the only object in the room that mattered. Outside the Pacific Coordination Office, a 2.3 million ton stone was falling at 19 kilometers per second. 7 hours to impact. No interceptors. No glassing. The Concordat had asked, through 3 formal channels, that humanity demonstrate appropriate response. Margaret had returned each request unopened. The 3 formal channels had not asked simply for gratitude. They had asked her to sign the Radiance Alignment Protocol. The language was clean, diplomatic, and built to survive a courtroom. Under the protocol, the Concordat would redirect the impactor and assume joint stewardship over all mass loss records created by the event. Handwritten lists would be scanned. Stone records would be photographed. Active name maintenance would be replaced by the Concordat's civic recovery schedule. After 3 generations, the names would be released to General Archive, where they would remain searchable and no longer load-bearing. The protocol used the word preservation 11 times. It used the word forgetting 0 times. Margaret had read it once. Then she had returned it unopened in every official sense that mattered, because to acknowledge the offer as negotiable would be to teach the Concordat where to put the knife. She wore the key on a leather cord her grandmother had braided in 1962. She had not taken it off in 26 years. The auditor logged it as decorative. The auditor logged everything as decorative. "You think we don't know what's coming," Margaret said. "You're right." She closed her notebook. "You think that's the problem?" The auditor's dorsal plates flattened against her spine. It would be another 40 hours before she learned what that gesture meant on her own body. The auditor was called Vekurian. She had been processing civic records for 71 of her years, which by her people's measure made her experienced but not yet senior. She had perceived Earth from the outer ring 3 months earlier and noted, in her first report, that the planet glowed in patches. Most of the planet was bright. Some regions were dim. One small office on the western coast of a country called the United States glowed in a manner she had never recorded before. Not bright, not dim. Something her instruments could not name. She had requested permission to investigate. The Concordat had granted it, with the standard caveat: observe and report, do not interfere. If asked to leave, leave. Margaret Hale had not asked her to leave. Margaret Hale had not asked her anything for 31 hours. Vekurian sat across the table now in a small wood-paneled room with 1 window and 3 lamps. The window faced east. The lamps were brass. The table was older than Margaret. A small, soft, bristled brush sat beside Margaret's notebook, its handle worn smooth, its bristles flecked with something organic. Vekurian had logged it as decorative. "You don't have to be here," Margaret said. "I do. You've been told to be here. That's different." Vekurian's mandibles clicked once, softly. In her culture, the click signaled mild agreement followed by mild correction. Margaret would not know what it meant. Margaret had not asked. Outside, the stone fell. Vekurian's instruments registered the Pacific Coordination Office at 0.47 on the radiance scale. Below baseline, far below baseline. For comparison, the city of Tokyo registered at 0.81. A hospice in Vermont registered at 0.73. A funeral home in Iowa registered at 0.69. Margaret's office was lower than a funeral home. This was the data point that had brought Vicurian to the room. She had assumed, on arrival, that Margaret's office was dying, that some institutional collapse had taken hold, that the human bureaucracy had failed in a way her people had records for. The Concordat held files on 23 civilizations that had failed in this manner. The pattern was always the same. The polity went dark. The radiance dropped. The civilization either rebuilt or was absorbed. But Margaret's office was not dying. Margaret was the polity. Margaret was reading reports, answering calls, signing documents. She had spent the morning of Impact Day reviewing pension allocations for retired marine biologists. She had taken a phone call from someone named Henry about a leaking pipe in a building Vicurian could not locate on any map. She had returned, each time, to her notebook. The notebook was not full of asteroid calculations. The notebook was full of names. Vicurian had managed to read 3 of them, upside down, when Margaret had stepped away to use the restroom. Eleanor Hale, 1974 to 1999. Marcus Hale, 1971 to 2008. Then a name she did not recognize, Tobias Werner, 1944 to 2017. She did not know what the names meant. She did not know why they were written by hand. She did not know why one of them, halfway down the 3rd page, had been gently traced over with what appeared to be the soft bristles of the small brush beside the notebook. She logged this too as decorative. At hour 32, Margaret stood up to refill her water glass. The motion was unhurried. Vicurian watched the brush, which Margaret picked up and slipped into the pocket of her coat, without looking at it. The way a person handles an object they have carried so long they no longer remember owning it. Vicurian made a note. Then she unmade it. Then she made it again. "Director Hale," she said, "I have been asked to deliver a final inquiry. Go ahead." The Concorde is prepared to redirect the impactor. We have the means. We have the authorization. We require, in exchange, only that you demonstrate appropriate response. Margaret sat down. She set the water glass on a coaster. She opened her notebook. She did not look at Vicurian. "I know what appropriate response means," she said. "Then you know that the request is small." "It isn't small. It is small relative to the alternative." Margaret tapped the pen against the page. She was looking at a name. Vicurian could not read which one from her angle. "Tell your superiors that the answer is the same. You will lose 43,000 citizens, 43,700. I have the projections. I have the model. I have the map of every house that will not be standing tomorrow." She lifted her eyes for the first time in 20 minutes. "I am not unaware." Vicurian's translation matrix processed the sentence in 3 layers. The first layer registered factual content. The second registered defiance. The third, the layer her people called the keening layer, registered something Vicurian had not been trained to categorize. She tried again. "Why?" Margaret closed her notebook. "Because what you call appropriate response is the only thing I will not give you. It is a gesture, Director, a formal acknowledgement. The Concordat does not require sacrifice. We require alignment." "I know." "You will not align." "No." The room held its silence the way a building holds heat. Margaret picked up her pen. The brush stayed in her pocket. Outside, somewhere over the Aleutians, the stone passed through a layer of cold, high-altitude air and lost a fraction of a % of its mass to friction. The fraction was meaningless. It would not save anyone. Vicurian filed a report. She marked Margaret Hale as non-aligned. She marked the office as anomalous. She did not yet have a category for what was happening, and the absence of a category was itself something she would later have to learn to live with. Margaret kept writing. The pen made a small dry sound. Vicurian had not until that moment noticed how few sounds the room produced. No clock, no machine, no ventilation hum. Margaret had chosen this room for a reason Vicurian did not understand. She would understand the reason at hour 68, when it was already too late to do anything with the understanding. The Concordat sent a second offer at hour 35. Vicurian presented it cleanly. The wording had been refined by a committee that handled first contact diplomacy on 1,200 worlds. It used the human language with care. It did not threaten. It did not bargain. It asked, in the gentlest possible structure, for the smallest possible acknowledgement. Margaret listened to all of it. When Vicurian finished, Margaret reached into her coat pocket and took out the brush. She set it on the table between them. "What is the function of that object?" Vicurian said. "It cleans things." "What things?" "Stone." "For what purpose?" Margaret looked at the brush. Her expression did not change, but her hand on the brush did. It went from holding to resting. Vicurian's instruments registered a faint shift in the room's radiance. The office dimmed by 1/100th of a point. "I have a question for you," Margaret said. "How does the Concordat manage its dead?" "I do not understand the question. What do you do with the bodies? With the names? With the records?" "The dead are processed by the relevant ministry. The records are stored. The names are retained for 3 generations and then released to General Archive. Released, discontinued from active reference. Forgotten, that is not the term we use." "But that's what it means." Vicurian did not answer. She did not, in that moment, have an answer. The protocol on death management was an old one. She had not examined it since her training. She did not, until Margaret asked, know that she did not know why it worked the way it did. Margaret picked up the brush. She turned it slowly in her fingers. The bristles were yellowed at the tips, white at the base. She had owned the brush for 31 years. "You glow," she said. "I do not understand. Your civilization, to your own instruments. You glow. Yes, you glow because you forget." The words took 11 seconds to translate through Vicurian's matrix. They translated cleanly. They translated honestly. They translated in a way that made the room briefly louder, although no sound had changed. "That is not the only reason." "No, but it's one of them. I have studied your records. I have read what you sent us about appropriate response. You consider grief a malfunction. You consider memory of loss a structural drag. You measure civic health by the brightness of forward motion." Margaret put the brush back in her pocket. "We don't measure it that way. We measure it differently. And I will not today let you measure us by your scale." Vicurian opened her secondary report panel. She began very carefully to draft a transmission to the Concordat. She wrote the first paragraph, then she deleted it. Then she wrote the first paragraph again, with different words. She did not, at the end of the hour, send the report. She would later not be able to say why she had not sent it. The closest she would ever come to explaining was that her dorsal plates had again flattened, the way they had flattened when Margaret first refused. And Vicurian had begun, somewhere below her consciousness, to associate the gesture with a state her language did not yet have a word for. Vicurian contacted other human officials at hour 38. She made the contacts with care. She used the channels the Concordat had been given. She spoke to the Secretary of Coordination. She spoke to a representative of the Pacific Defense Authority. She spoke to a senior officer of what humans called the Joint Chiefs. Each official took her call. Each official listened. Each official told her, in slightly different language, the same thing. The decision sits with Director Hale. Vicurian had been trained to recognize deferral. She had been trained to identify when a polity was hiding its decision-makers behind a single figure to absorb responsibility. This was not that. The officials did not sound like they were hiding. They sounded like they were telling her where the authority actually lived. She asked the senior officer of the Joint Chiefs why. The officer paused for a long time. Then he said, "Because she's the one who carries it." "Carries what?" "The list." The line went quiet. The officer did not elaborate. Vicurian filed the conversation under anomalous authority structures and closed her panel. She had begun by now to develop a working theory. Margaret Hale was not the Pacific Coordinator. She was something else. The Pacific Coordinator was a title. Margaret was a function. The function was not described in any human document Vicurian could find, but it was acknowledged across every official she had reached. Margaret was the one who carried the list. Vicurian returned to the room at hour 39. Margaret was reading a letter. She did not look up. "You spoke to the Joint Chiefs," Margaret said. "Yes. What did they tell you?" "That you carry the list." Margaret nodded. "That's accurate. What is the list?" "The list is the list." "Director, I am asking you a direct question, and the answer would help me, and through me, help the Concordat understand what is happening here." Margaret set down the letter. She looked at Vicurian for what might have been the first sustained time in their 39 hours together. Her eyes were gray. Vicurian had not noticed. Vicurian had not been trained to notice human eye color. "The list," Margaret said, "is everyone we have lost since we started keeping it. We started keeping it in 1864. It has, as of this morning, 318,491 names. By tomorrow it will have 362,191. I will write the new names by hand. I will write them tonight. Because if I wait, I will not write them, and they have to be written by someone who knew them, and I am the one who agreed to know them. You did not know them. I will. I have studied each of the 43,700. I have read what was available. I have read their public records. I have looked at their faces. I have, as of this morning, completed 19,000 of them. I will complete the rest before midnight. She picked up the pen. This is what the Concordat is asking me to stop doing. Vakurian's reporting panel logged a system error at hour 40. She checked the log. The error was not in her instruments. It was in her categorization protocol. She had been trying to file the conversation under eccentric civic ritual, and the system had returned a flag she had never seen before. Insufficient anchor for classification. She had no anchor for what Margaret was doing. Her people did not memorize their dead. Her people did not retain the names of those who had not been processed in 3 generations. Her people did not, as a function of civic life, sit alone in rooms and study faces of people they had never met so they could write the names by hand. She did not know what to do with this. She did not know whether to be impressed or alarmed or unmoved. Her instruments registered her own internal radiance as fluctuating, which had not happened in 11 years of service. She set the panel aside. She returned her attention to Margaret. "Show me the list," she said. Margaret looked up. "No, Director, no. You can ask twice. The answer will be no the second time. I am asking once. I am asking because if I do not understand what is being protected here, I cannot transmit it to the Concordat, and if I cannot transmit it, the Concordat will not understand, and if the Concordat does not understand, the impact will be allowed to occur." Margaret looked at her steadily. "I know." The 2 words landed in the room like an object dropped on stone. Vakurian's instruments shifted. The radiance red dropped another small fraction. Margaret had not raised her voice. Margaret had not displayed anger. Margaret had said the simplest words a human can say. "I know." Vakurian tried again. "You will not show me the list because if you show me the list, the Concordat will negotiate around it. They will treat it as an asset. They will offer to digitize it. They will offer to preserve it. They will make accommodations. Yes, and you do not want accommodations. No, you want the list to be yours. Yes, even at the cost of 43,700 lives. Margaret's hand went to her pocket. She did not take the brush out. She just held it through the fabric. Her thumb moved along the handle. "The lives," she said, "are already lost. The Concordat is not offering to save them by ordinary means. The Concordat is offering to save them in exchange for something that will, over time, undo the work of carrying them. That is not a trade I am authorized to make, not by my office, not by my country, not by myself. Who authorized you? The dead." Vakurian held still for 41 seconds. This was a long time for her body to hold still. Her dorsal plates moved once and then settled. "That is not an authority the Concordat recognizes," she said. "I know." The 2 words again. The same 2 words. Vakurian began to suspect that Margaret had said them on purpose, in that exact form, because she wanted Vakurian to hear them the same way twice. Margaret was, Vakurian realized, teaching her. The teaching was so quiet it could be mistaken for silence. The stone fell. At hour 43, Margaret stood up and asked Vakurian to follow her. They walked down a corridor Vakurian had not been in before. The corridor was lit by the same brass lamps as the room. The floor was wood. The wood was old. Margaret moved through it the way a person moves through a place they have lived in, longer than they have lived anywhere else. They came to a door. The door had no markings. Margaret took the brass key from her neck. She put it in the lock. She turned it. The door opened onto a room. The room was full of stones. Vakurian's instruments tried for several seconds to categorize what she was seeing. The stones were carved. The stones were arranged in rows. The stones bore names. Vakurian counted in her first pass 340 stones. She counted on each stone between 4 and 22 names. She did not finish counting the names. "This is the list," Margaret said. "It is not paper. The notebook is the working copy. The stones are the record. The notebook becomes the stones, eventually. The stones do not become anything else. Why stone? Because paper burns. Because computers are turned off. Because anything that requires a power source can be ended by an enemy. Stone is what we agreed on. Stone is what I will leave behind." Vakurian walked slowly down a row. Her sensors picked up traces of something organic on the surfaces of the stones. Something that grew on them. something Margaret had been cleaning off, year after year, with the brush in her pocket. "You clean them," Vicurian said. "Yes, with the brush. Yes, this is what the brush is for." "Yes." Vicurian stopped in front of a stone with the name Eleanor Hale carved at the top. Below it were 31 other names. The carving was even. The carving had been done by a single hand over many years. The dates beside each name ranged from 1999 to last spring. "Your daughter," Vicurian said. "Yes, she is at the top of this stone. This is her stone. The others on it died in the same week she did. I carved them into her stone so she would not be alone." "You carved them yourself?" "Yes." "With what?" Margaret reached into her other pocket and took out a small chisel. The handle of the chisel was the same wood as the brush. They had been made, Vicurian understood now, by the same person, in the same season, for the same purpose. They had been used together for 31 years. Vicurian's translation matrix logged a new entry in its lexicon. She did not consciously notice this. The entry was tagged under a category her language did not have an equivalent for. She would notice the entry 6 months later, when she returned home, and find that her own body had built a word she did not know she needed. The room held many stones. Margaret stood at the doorway. She did not enter. She had entered enough times. The stone outside the room kept falling. Vicurian sent her interim report at hour 46. She had not slept. She had not eaten. Her people did neither in the human sense. But they paused, periodically, and she had not paused. Her instruments told her she was operating at reduced capacity. She told them she was aware. The report read as follows. Director Hale is in possession of a long-form civic memorial in physical form. The memorial includes hand-carved stone tablets bearing the names of every human casualty of mass loss events since the year 1864. The memorial is maintained by a single appointed keeper. The current keeper has held the position for 26 years. The keeper has refused alignment because alignment, in her interpretation, would require structural changes to the memorial's status under Concordat protocols. The keeper is choosing the memorial over the lives of 43,700 citizens of her own jurisdiction. This appears to be a willed choice. This appears to be supported by the polity's other officials. This appears to be the function the keeper was appointed to perform. She sent the report. She marked it final. She sat back in her chair and rested her eyes for the first time in 46 hours. The Concordat's response came in 70 minutes. The Concordat acknowledged the report. The Concordat recommended that the impact be allowed to proceed. The Concordat noted that humanity had, in this matter, demonstrated sufficient internal alignment around the choice. The choice itself was anomalous. The choice itself was not malformed, the Concordat would observe. Vicurian closed the channel. She returned to the room. Margaret was at her notebook, writing. "They've accepted it," Vicurian said. "I know. They will not intervene. I know. You will lose your 43,700. Margaret did not stop writing. She wrote a name. Then she wrote a date. Then she ran the bristles of the brush twice along the line below the name, as if dusting it off, as if making room for the name beneath. "You think," Margaret said, "that we have chosen sovereignty over survival. I have reported that. You think we have chosen our memorial over our living. It is what I observed." Margaret set down the pen. She looked at Vicurian. Her eyes were tired. Her hands were tired. The room was tired. Everything in the room was tired except for the brush, which seemed, to Vicurian's instruments, to be slightly warmer than the rest of the room. She did not know why. "That's not what this is," Margaret said. Vicurian waited. "Do not mistake me," Margaret said. "I am not protecting stone instead of people." She turned one page of the notebook. The names on this page were not yet names of the dead. They were addresses, bus routes, nursing homes, coastal shelters, roof coordinates, radio frequencies. They were the living work, written in the same hand as the other work, because Margaret did not believe the categories were as separate as the Concordat believed. "I have moved everyone I can move. I have ordered everything I can order. There are helicopters in the air, trains running without tickets, fishing boats taking strangers inland, teenagers carrying oxygen tanks down stairwells, and one old man in Crescent Bay refusing to leave his cat till the firefighter lies to him and says the cat is already on the truck. We are doing what we can do." She placed her palm on the notebook. "What I will not do is let your people sell us the illusion that being saved by you is the same as remaining ourselves. That is not what this is," Margaret said again. And this time the words came slower, the way a person speaks when they have decided to teach, but have not yet decided how much. What I am protecting is not the memorial. The memorial is the result. The memorial is the visible part. What are you protecting? Margaret looked at the brush. She turned it once in her hand. I am protecting the fact that we still know how to do this. I am protecting the muscle. The concordat will save us once. The concordat will save us twice. After the third time, we will not remember how to write the names ourselves. We will have forgotten how. We will have lost the hand. And then we will glow. Vicurian's first response to what Margaret had said was protocol. She filed it, she categorized it, she tried to slot it into the existing lexicon. The lexicon refused. The lexicon returned the same flag as before, insufficient anchor for classification. She tried then a second response. She tried to remember her own training in death management. She had been 7 years old in her own measure when she had been instructed in the protocol. She remembered the room. She remembered the instructor. She remembered the diagram on the wall. The diagram showed a clean curve. The curve described the radiance of a polity over time. The curve dipped briefly at the moment of mass loss, then rose further, then leveled at a brightness slightly higher than before the loss had occurred. She had been told at 7 years old that this was the proof of civic health. The curve always returned. The brightness always rose. The polity was always stronger after. She had not, then or since, asked what happened to the names of the dead between the dip and the rise. She did not, then or since, know whether the names existed at all in any system her people maintained. She had assumed they did. She had assumed there were records. She had assumed the records were stored somewhere. She had assumed someone, in some ministry, somewhere on her world knew the names. Now, sitting in Margaret's room, she was no longer sure. She opened a query channel to the Concordat archives. She submitted a search. She asked, in the cleanest formal language her culture used, for any record of the deceased from her own polity's most recent mass loss event. The mass loss event had occurred 43 of her years earlier. The event had taken 16,000 of her people. The archive returned a result in 3 seconds. The result was a number. The number was 16,000. The number was followed by a date. The number was followed by a region. The number was followed by no names. She submitted a follow-up query. She asked for the names. The archive returned. Names not maintained. Records released to General Archive after 3 generations. 3 generations was, by her people's measure, 18 of her years. She had been 11 of her years at the time of the event. Some of the dead would have been people she knew. Some of them would have been people her family had known. Some of them would have been children. She did not, at the moment of the query, know the name of a single one of them. She could not have written them by hand if she had wanted to. She closed the channel. Margaret was still writing. "You are checking your own records," Margaret said. She did not look up. "How did you know? Your face changed. I have watched a lot of faces. Yours just changed. My people do not retain names past 3 generations. I know. I have read about your people. We have an embassy file. It is thin, but it is accurate. I did not know this about my own people until just now." Margaret nodded. She did not stop writing. "Most people don't," she said. "Most people don't ever ask. That's the whole point of the system. The brightness comes from not asking. We chose a long time ago to be the kind of people who ask. That is what I am protecting." Vicurian did not respond. Her dorsal plates flattened. She did not, this time, fail to notice. Vicurian expected Margaret to look away when the first projected casualty confirmations arrived. Margaret did not. She stood beside the communications table while the names came in unevenly, as living systems failed and recovered and failed again. Some arrived with birth dates. Some arrived with only addresses. Some arrived as descriptions. Woman in blue raincoat near pier, unidentified boy from shelter 3, elderly couple in the White House above the marina. Margaret did not permit the placeholders to remain placeholders. Each one became a task. "Find the boy's name," she told one aide. The aide was shaking. "Director, we have 900 incoming. Then find one, then another." The aide nodded and began. Vicurian watched the office change shape around the instruction. The humans were not refusing scale. They were refusing to let scale excuse imprecision. That distinction entered Vicurian's body before it entered her report. At hour 50, the impact entered its final approach window. The Pacific Defense Authority issued evacuation notices for the projected blast zone. The notices reached the Pacific Court Station office on a quiet ping. Margaret read the ping. She did not respond. The notices were not addressed to her. They had been issued under a different chain of authority, the one that handled the living. Margaret's chain of authority handled the dead. She had begun at hour 47 to write the names of the not yet dead. She had a list of every projected casualty. She had cross-referenced each name with public records. She had a small photograph clipped to each entry. The photographs were from driver's licenses, professional pages, school yearbooks. She studied each face before she wrote the name. She wrote the name with care. Vicurian watched her work. You write them before they die. Yes, you write them in the projected order of death. The projected order is not knowable. I write them in the order of the names. Alphabetical, by city, by age. I have a system. The system was developed in 1923 by a woman named Adelaide Marsh who began this work after the Great War. I follow her system because it works. You did not know Adelaide Marsh. I knew the woman who knew her. She trained me. She died in 2014. Her name is on the stone in the second row, fourth column. You wrote her name yourself. I wrote her name first, before I wrote any others. That is how the office is passed. Vicurian sat with this for a long time. You are saying that this office is not appointed by your government. You are saying that this office is passed from one keeper to the next. My government acknowledges it. My government does not appoint it. The keeper appoints the next keeper. The keeper does this once, near the end. The next keeper writes the previous keeper's name. That is the only will write your name. Margaret looked at her. The room was silent. I have not decided. You are 73 years old. You have held this office for 26 years. I know. You have not chosen a successor. I have considered many. I have not chosen. Why? Margaret looked down at the notebook. She turned the page. She wrote a name. She let the brush rest against the line beneath. Because the next person has to know what it is they are agreeing to. And I have not, in 26 years, found anyone who fully knows. People know parts. People know the work. People know the building. People know the stones. But the keeper is not the work. And the keeper is not the building. And the keeper is not the stones. The keeper is the one who refuses the concordat. And until I find someone who would today, with no preparation, refuse you in this room, I cannot pass this office. So I have not. Vicurian held very still. You know, she said, that you may die before you find them. Yes. You know that if you die, the work may end. Yes. You know that the brightness then would return. Margaret nodded. And you would still choose this. I have been choosing this for 26 years. Today is not the day I will stop. The brush fell from Margaret's hand at hour 52. It fell quietly. It rolled once on the table. Margaret looked at it for a long second before she picked it up. Vicurian observed the second. She filed it. She did not yet know what the second meant. Margaret put the brush back in her pocket. Her hand stayed on it. You will want to know about Eleanor, she said. I have not asked. You will want to, eventually. We can do it now. Vicurian nodded. She set her instruments to passive record. She turned her face slightly so that her primary sensor array was not directed at Margaret. This was, in her culture, a gesture of receiving. Margaret would not know what it meant. Margaret was, by then, looking out the window. Eleanor was 25. She was a teacher. She taught children with reading difficulties at a public school in San Diego. She walked to work. On the morning of November 16, 1999, she was walking to work and a truck ran a stop sign and she was killed instantly. The truck driver had not slept in 2 days. He survived. He served 4 years. He came to her grave once. I let him. He left a note. I still have the note. I have not read it since the year I received it. Vicurian held still. I was not the keeper then. I was a city attorney. I had a husband. I had 2 children. I had a job I liked. I had a life that was, by the standards of my country and my class and my time, comfortable. After Eleanor, the keeper at the time, who was a woman named Marion Cole, came to see me. She did not know me. She had not met me. She came to my house in the second week after. She brought a cup of tea. She did not bring her notebook. What did she say? She said, I have a job that I am looking for someone to do. She said, I am not going to tell you about it now. I am going to come back in 6 months. If you are still alive in 6 months, and you are still in the city in 6 months and you want to talk, we will talk. If not, I will look elsewhere. Then she finished her tea and she left. She did not pressure you. She did not say anything else. She came back in 6 months. I was alive. I was in the city. I sat down with her, and she told me what the work was. She told me everything. She told me about the Concordat. She told me what was coming, eventually. She told me that I would, one day, sit in a room like this one and refuse. She said, if you cannot do that, do not take the office. If you can, take it now. Take it tonight. Do not wait. You took it that night. I took it that night. And told my husband he left within the year. He could not, he said, live with someone who carried this. I do not blame him. The work is hard to live with. I have a son who has not spoken to me in 19 years. I do not blame him either. The work is hard to live near. You lost your husband and your son for this. I lost them. The Concordat would say I lost the radiance of my own household. And you would say, I would say I kept the names. Vicurian transmitted a private query at hour 54. She did not route it through the formal Concordat channel. She used an older channel, a personal channel, the kind her people maintained for matters of family. She queried her own household archive. She asked for the name of her cousin, who had died in the mass loss event of 43 years earlier. Her cousin had been 6 of his years at the time. Vicurian had been 11. They had grown up in adjoining nest rings. They had eaten together for 9 years. The household archive returned a result. The result was an apologetic flag. The household archive did not maintain individual records past 3 generations either. The cousin's name had been released to General Archive 19 years ago. The General Archive had received the name and discontinued it from active reference. The name no longer existed in any system her people maintained. The cousin existed only in Vicurian's own memory, and Vicurian's memory was not, by any standard her people recognized, a record. She had, for 43 of her years, glowed. So had her household. So had her people. So had her polity. She had not until this hour known what the glow was made of. She had been an archivist who had never lost anyone. She had been told this was strength. She knew now that it was silence. She closed the channel. She opened her formal report panel. She began to draft a transmission to the Concordat. She wrote the first paragraph. She deleted it. She wrote the first paragraph again, with different words. She deleted it. She sat at the panel for 10 minutes without typing. Margaret had been watching her. Margaret had not said anything for those 10 minutes. Director, Vicurian said, yes. I am going to ask you a question. I want you to answer it as honestly as you are able. The answer will determine what I do next. Go ahead. Has your office, in its history, ever been offered the brightness? Margaret thought about this for some time. She turned the brush in her hand. She placed it back on the table. In 1947, after the war, the Soviets offered to absorb our list into their archive. They offered to digitize it. They offered to maintain it in perpetuity. They offered also certain political concessions. Marion Cole's predecessor refused. In 1968, the United Nations offered to make the list a registered cultural artifact under their humanitarian protection. The keeper at the time refused. In 1989, a private foundation offered $50 million to acquire the list and place it in a public museum. The keeper refused. In 2003, a digital archive service offered to back up the list at no cost. The keeper refused. In each case, the offer was made because the offer would have, in some way, lightened the work. And in each case, the offer was refused because the work is not supposed to be lightened. If it is lightened, it does not produce what it is for. And the Concordat is the largest offer so far. The Concordat is the offer the whole office was designed to refuse. Every keeper in their training is told to expect this offer. We did not know the form it would take. We did not know whether it would come from another country, or from a new kind of government, or from somewhere else. We knew only that it would come. And we knew that when it came, the keeper would have to be ready to refuse. Vicurian's dorsal plates flattened completely. She did not, this time, even try to misread the gesture. Hour 60 arrived. Hour 61. The stone was less than an hour out. Margaret had finished writing the last of the 43,700 names 2 hours earlier. She had then gone to the room with the stones. She had turned on a small lamp. She had taken out a stone she had been preparing. It was blank. It was the next stone in the row. It would hold the new names. She did not carve them now. She would carve them over the next year, by hand, one at a time. The brush would dust the fresh chips away as she worked. The chisel would do the cutting. This was how it had always been done. She came back to the room at hour 62. She sat down across from Vicurian. She did not pick up the notebook. "You can leave now," she said. I am supposed to stay. You're not supposed to do anything. You're supposed to observe. You can observe from outside this office. You can observe from your ship. You can observe from your home world. The observation is just a category. You can leave. I would like to stay. All right. Margaret looked out the window. The sky was beginning to do the thing it does when an object is entering atmosphere. The light bent in a particular way. The air pressure shifted. Margaret had read about this. She had not seen it before. No one had seen it before this close, in living memory. I will not pretend, Vicurian said, that I understand what you have done. You don't have to pretend anything. I understand it partially. I do not understand it fully. I have not had time. You have time now. I have less than an hour. You have more than that. Time is one of the things you have more of than I do. You will have decades to think about this. I would like to ask you to use them. Vicurian did not answer immediately. She watched Margaret. She watched the brush which had returned to its position by the notebook. She watched the brass key, which Margaret had picked up at some point and was now holding in her left hand. What would you have me do with the decades, she said. Margaret turned the key in her fingers. That is not for me to tell you. I would prefer that you tell me. I know, but I will not. The silence then was long. Vicurian did not break it. Margaret did not break it. The room did not break it. The room had held this kind of silence many times before. The room was, Vicurian understood now, a tool. The wood had been chosen. The lamps had been chosen. The absence of clocks had been chosen. Everything about the room was designed to allow the work to happen. The room was as much a part of the office as the keeper was. After several minutes, Margaret spoke. The Concordat saves civilizations, she said. It does not save the dead. We save the dead. She did not say it for Vicurian. She said it the way a person says something they have said to themselves every morning for 26 years. She said it to the room. She said it to the brush. She said it to the stones in the room beyond the door. She said it to her daughter, whose name was on a stone she had carved herself. The stone outside the window arrived. The impact occurred at hours 63 and 17 minutes. The strike point was 410 miles west of the Pacific Coordination Office, in deep ocean water. The displaced water rose to a height that the projections had been accurate about. The shock wave traveled. The coastline received it. The casualty count came in over the following hours and finalized over the following weeks. The final number was 43,712, 12 more than the projection. The 12 had not been on Margaret's list. Margaret would write them later, that night and the next morning, before she slept. The Pacific Coordination Office was damaged. The east window broke. One of the lamps fell and shattered. The wood of the table cracked along a line that Vicurian's instruments told her had been a stress fracture since the 1970s, finally giving way under the vibration. The notebook fell to the floor. Margaret picked it up. She brushed the dust from the cover with her sleeve. She put it back on the table. Vicurian's instruments registered that the office, in the hour after impact, glowed at 0.39, lower than ever. Lower than any structure she had previously measured. The radiance had dropped further into the well. She watched Margaret pick a fragment of glass out of the back of her hand. Margaret did this without commenting on it. Margaret had been hit by a small piece of the window. She had not flinched. The glass came out cleanly. Margaret put it in a small tray on the table. The tray, Vicurian realized, was for that purpose. The tray had been there the whole time. You knew this room would break, Vicurian said. I knew the window would break. I have known for years. I did not replace it because if it breaks now, that is information. If it had not broken, that would also have been information. Either way, I would have wanted to know. You were testing the projections. I was watching them. Vicurian's primary sensor array adjusted. She did not, in that moment, have any of her standard protocols available to her. The protocols were intact. The protocols were running. They were simply not, anymore, the things she was using to understand the room. She had moved past the protocols. She did not know what she had moved into. Margaret sat down. She reached into her pocket and took out the brush. She placed it on the table. She also took out the small chisel. She placed it beside the brush. Then she took the brass key from her neck. She undid the leather cord. She placed the key on the table between the brush and the chisel. The three objects sat in a line. These are the tools, Margaret said. I see. They have been used by Marion Cole and by me. They were used before Marion Cole by a man named Charles Aoki. They were used before him by Adelaide Marsh, who made them. Adelaide cut the wood from a tree in her own yard. She was a furniture maker before she did this work. She was good with wood. She was good with brass. She was, by all accounts, a difficult woman. I would have liked to know her. Vicurian looked at the three objects. Are you offering them to me? No. Then why have you put them out? So that you can see them. So that you know what they look like. So that when you find the next keeper, in the place you come from, you will know what to make for them. Vicurian stayed in Margaret's office for another 4 days. The Concordat had requested a full report. She delayed it. She had never delayed a report before. The Concordat sent a query asking the reason for the delay. She did not respond. She had never failed to respond to a query before. Her dorsal plates did not flatten anymore. They had moved into a configuration she did not have a word for. The configuration would later, in her own language, be the basis of a word she would coin. The word would mean something close to keeping, but not exactly that. The word would, over the following decades, be added to her people's lexicon by a slow, informal process, the way new words always entered. On the 5th day she stood up. She walked over to where Margaret sat. Margaret was carving a name into the new stone. The bristles of the brush dusted the line as Margaret worked. The chisel made the cut. The tans made the cut steady. Director, Vicurian said. Margaret did not stop carving. I would like to know, Vicurian said, the name of your cousin, if you would tell me, if you remember it. Margaret stopped carving. She looked up. I have no cousin. Mine. I would like to know mine. Margaret set down the chisel. She set down the brush. She turned on her bench to face Vicurian fully. What was his name? Vicurian made the sound. It was not a sound that translated. It was the sound her cousin's name had been when she had said it to him, in the nest ring, in the years they had eaten together. The sound was small and round and warm. Margaret listened to it. She did not interrupt. She did not, after the sound was complete, ask Vicurian to repeat it. She reached for a piece of paper. She found a pen. She wrote, in human script, the closest phonetic approximation of the name. She showed it to Vicurian. Vicurian corrected the second syllable. Margaret corrected the paper. Vicurian looked at the paper. That is him, Vicurian said. What were his years? He was 6. He was born in the season your calendars would call autumn, 49 of my years ago. He died in the mass loss event of 43 of my years ago, in the 3rd week of the season your calendars would call spring. He liked the cold. He liked the sound water made under ice. He did not like to be alone. He was not alone when he died, but the others with him are also lost from our records. Margaret wrote each of these things on the paper. The handwriting was careful. The handwriting was the same handwriting she used for her own list. She made no distinction. This is now a record, Margaret said. It is one piece of paper. It is a beginning. You will have to build the rest. You will have to choose the form. We chose stone. You will choose something else. You will choose what your people can carry. Vicurian took the paper. She folded it. She placed it in the slot of her uniform that her people used for objects of permanent significance. The slot had been empty for 43 of her years. She had not, until that hour, understood that it had been empty. She bowed. The bow was deep. It was a bow her people did not use anymore. She had used it now anyway. Margaret died 9 years later. She was 82. She had finished carving the 43,712 names into the row of new stones over the course of 6 years, working most evenings, alone, with the brush and the chisel. She had then begun on the next stone. She had not been able to choose a successor. She had written, in her notebook, the name of every person she had considered. There were 11 names. Beside each one, she had written a single word in her small, careful hand. Beside the last name, she had not written anything. She had run out of time before the word arrived. The Concordat sent Vicurian to the funeral. Vicurian was, by then, the senior coordinator of what her people called the holding office. The holding office had been established 4 years after the impact, on Vicurian's proposal. Its mandate was to maintain the names of the dead beyond 3 generations. The office had, at the time of Margaret's death, 23,000 named entries. The office had been criticized by older officials for reducing the radiance of certain polities. The office had not been closed. The criticism had not been enough. At the funeral, Vicurian stood at the back of the small crowd. The crowd was, mostly, people Vicurian did not recognize. A few were officials. Most were not. There was a tall woman with gray hair standing near the front. who held herself the way Vicurian had once seen Margaret hold herself. Vicurian watched her. The woman did not speak during the service. After the service, the woman walked to the room with the stones. She had a key. The key was on a leather cord. Vicurian did not know who had braided the cord, but the braid was new. Vicurian followed at a distance. The woman opened the door. The woman entered the room. The woman took, from her own pocket, a small, soft-bristled brush. The brush was new, the bristles were white, the handle was unworn. The woman began, with care, to brush a stone. Vicurian walked back to the office. She sat at Margaret's table. The brass key Margaret had placed there 9 years earlier was still there. So was the original brush. So was the chisel. The objects had stayed where Margaret had put them. The new keeper would not need the old ones. The new keeper had her own. Vicurian picked up the original brush. She held it. She had carried it once briefly when Margaret had let her. She had not held it since. The handle was warm. The bristles were soft. The wood smelled faintly of stone and lichen and time. She placed the brush in her uniform's permanent slot, beside the folded paper that bore her cousin's name. She walked out of the office. The sky outside the window was the same sky. The room was the same room. The radiance of the office on her instruments read 0.39. It had not changed in 9 years. It would not change in the next 90. It would, by every standard her people used, be considered a failure. She had stopped using that standard. She thought, walking to her transport, that she would like to know what the woman at the funeral would have written beside her own name on Margaret's list. The space was blank. The space would remain blank. The woman would write someone else's name first. That was the order of the office. That was the order of the work. That was the order Vicurian understood now, of being the kind of people who ask. She did not know who she would write first. She had time to decide. She did not yet know whose name, but she had begun to suspect that it would be the cousin's, and that when she wrote it, she would write it by hand, and that when she wrote it, she would not glow.